Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. Last week, if you missed it, we had Lisa Schaefer. We talked all about chakras and trauma healing and how to incorporate those into day-to-day life and also like into the therapy world. And we noticed as podcasts went on that it was definitely something that deserved an entire series. So stay tuned. We're going to start that Amanda May, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start that series. We're going to cover each of the 7 chakras. So stay tuned for that. But this week we have Rebecca Ray with us, and we're going to talk all about intimate partner betrayal trauma and the process of healing from that, some common responses to that, and more. So welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Rebecca Ray. I'm an LMFT associate. I'm licensed in the state of Texas, and I'm under the supervision of David Lawson, LMFT-S. I am also a certified sex addiction therapist candidate and a certified clinical partner specialist candidate and the owner of Ray Family Therapy with locations in San Marcos and Cypress, Texas. I received my betrayal partner trauma training through my CSAT training and additionally through the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists. So that's where I got most of the information that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So yeah.
Awesome.
That's me in a nutshell.
Love it.
We met her.
Okay, so let's...
We talk about TikTok.
Oh, yeah. We met Rebecca on TikTok because, we talk about TikTok
right.
every episode. So stay tuned because we've scheduled multiple TikTok people. So we have them all coming.
That's right.
Let's just delve right in because I have a feeling this is going to be a topic we could talk about for hours. So I know we have some bullet points. What is betrayal trauma? Like when we talked about this subject, I was thinking like, oh, you're talking about, like layman's terms, cheating.
Yep.
And then we say betrayal trauma, and ooh, that feels so deep, right? So can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So I feel like it's really important for our purposes today to differentiate between 2 different things when we're talking about betrayal trauma. When we are talking about intimate betrayal trauma, yes, you're talking about the wounds from infidelity, but for the purposes that I'm talking about today, we're talking about the wounds that a partner experiences once they find out that their partner, who they thought was monogamous, is actually engaging in sexually addictive and compulsive behaviors. And so I think it's important to differentiate between what we would call traditional infidelity, right? Of what we're all taught. If you're a marriage and family therapist, you're taught this in school, that distancing and isolation occurs in the relationship, and maybe one partner starts to see the grass is greener on the other side. That's not what is happening in sex addiction. So in sex addiction, the addict keeps everything super compartmentalized, super secret. These are things that are usually been happening long before they met their partner and continue to happen throughout the relationship. And so sexual addiction can be comprised of a lot of different sexual behaviors that are compulsive, they're chronic, they need more and more and more of whatever it is, or the behaviors become riskier and riskier and riskier in order to satisfy the need, the want, and the desire. They have a desire to stop, an inability to stop, despite the fact that they're hurting themselves and others. Does that make sense?
Yes, a whole lot more behind that than just like you said, than just your traditional infidelity. Not that that's not betrayal and causing that kind of impact, but that's a whole other side to it.
Right, and I can imagine that there's going to be some therapists who are listening to this podcast that are thinking, "Wow, she's calling the addict a sex addict? Like, oh, that sounds so punitive." And this doesn't mean that I don't have compassion for the people who are dealing with sex addiction. The difference between the way we would treat an alcohol addiction and the way we would treat a sex addiction. In alcohol addiction, we look at that as systemic, right? So we think about more the codependency type of model per se, and we look at the whole family system and look at changing. When there's sex addiction, the partner is not at fault. So if you take a codependency, quote unquote, model and apply it to sex addiction, you're going to be hurting that betrayed partner even more you're creating a secondary trauma for them, right? Because they hold no responsibility in this. Most of the time, they have no clue that any of this is even going on, right? As far as they're concerned, their partner is engaged in the relationship, is monogamous, is the church-going husband, or whatever it is that's within their value and their belief system. You know, they're living the life that they think they're living. And then when they find out what's going on, their entire world is crushed and pulled out from underneath them. Does that make sense?
So from a therapist perspective, for me, it wasn't that, ooh, you know, that you're being negative. It was, ooh, that's not in the DSM.
No, it's not in the DSM. It's in the ICD-11 now.
Okay, all right.
So, and they are hoping to compile enough research to get it into the DSM in the next round. They're working on that. I am not one of those people working on it.
We do private pay therapy, so we don't believe that you need to have a DSM diagnosis to do therapy. So I'm not saying it needs to be in there, but just I know there's going to be therapists that are listening that say sex addiction. That's not something that can be diagnosed, right?
Yep, and you're right. There is a camp of people out there that think that, and that's okay, right? I'm just in the other camp.
And you're seeing
because there's people that are suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of us said the same thing at the same time.
Right. Yeah. When you see the pain that comes from this, when both the addict, the partner, the couple system, the entire family, it's hard for me to say that it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. I can't be in denial about it. So
one of the things, and now you kind of got my brain thinking that I could guess what it is. One of the things you want to make sure you touched on today was D-Day. So what is D-Day?
D-Day is Discovery Day. So this is the day in which the partner's entire world is pulled out from underneath them. Usually they'll find a text message. They may come across browser history. They may come across receipts, credit card bills, credit card charges, that they go, what is this? Right? And then they start looking for more, right? Because that's a natural thing to want to do. It's hard to believe that your spouse or your partner is doing this, right? And I also want to make sure that it's clear that there are both men and women that are betrayed partners of sex addicts. Most of the literature that we have, and most of the time when people are talking about this, they are referring to women, but there are a lot of men who experience this too. And it's not that they aren't out there. We just have a lack of resources and a lack of literature on it. So it's not to say that it's not there.
Many issues, right? Like, not that domestic violence isn't an issue with men, it's just less reported because of the stigma, right? And I could go on about that with so many topics. You know, Rebecca, I'm thinking, so there's a day, so D-Day is kind of the day where there's concrete evidence.
Right.
But when we started talking, my mind was thinking of a traditional addict, like you were mentioning, alcohol or drug addiction or gambling. Before D-Day, are there certain behaviors or emotional or communication or things that aren't so concrete that partners might notice but kind of brush off or be able to explain away?
They are extremely sleuth. They're very good at compartmentalizing this entire part of their life and hiding it from their family. So for us to say, yeah, I mean, a partner's probably going to be able to look back and go, oh my gosh, that time that they said they were working late, they weren't working late. You know, oh my gosh, that time that they told me they had that work trip in California, like, what were they doing? Right. So they're going to go back in history and they're going to say, oh my God, all these times, right?
Hindsight's 2020.
Hindsight's 2020 as they're going through it. No, they keep all of this is secret. I mean, that's one of the things that we work on with the addict is creating their secrets list, right? And getting all of that out in the open. So it's not something that necessarily they're going to be able to see or notice.
It's more inconspicuous than some other, I don't know if that's fair to say. I don't want people to freak out for me saying that, but more, it's a complete.
Well, with an alcohol addiction, right, you may have evidence of a DUI. Your partner may be coming home intoxicated, right? You may see
or just, their brain is impacted, so they might be more irritable when they don't have it. So that's what I was thinking, like, if they're unable to get that addiction need met for whatever reason, might the partner notice, like, oh, you're a little more on edge than usual, or things like that. But it's more of a hindsight thing. I appreciate you explaining that, because that makes sense now.
Yeah, exactly. So Discovery Day is a date that the partner is never going to forget, right? They will walk in and tell you, my D-Day is March 3rd, 2017, right? They will always remember the first day that they found out.
Okay. And
right? Because their whole life changes after that.
Right. And that's in a way, it hits me as like so interesting and powerful, because it's, like with being on the other side, working with addicts, not that I do that much in my practice, but you have like clean dates or sober dates. Like in our field, you have dates that mark other things, but in that it's a lot different.
Yeah.
Remembering that date. And I know you said, Rebecca, like kind of, we started to touch on it, but can you explain to, both of us and the community, what are quote unquote normal, typical, or common reactions or responses to betrayal trauma for those on the other side of it?
Yeah, so that's actually important to talk about. So a majority of betrayed partners would qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder if they have a complex history of trauma stemming all the way back to family and childhood. You could be looking more at a complex PTSD diagnosis. But the responses are similar, right? So in a PTSD diagnosis, is we know just from what we know from the DSM, right? And in diagnosing that, there's hyperarousal. The betrayed partners experience helplessness, sleep problems, immobility, right? Lack of energy, reliving the event, hypervigilance, anxiety, nightmares, withdrawing, avoidance, mood swings, panic attacks, phobias, flashbacks, denial, oversensitivity, depression, restlessness, confusion, disassociation, powerlessness, and rage. And these are just a few examples.
I was waiting for the anger.
Oh, yeah.
Rage.
Oh, yeah, rage. Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the worst betrayals ever. Right? This is somebody that you trusted implicitly. And the things that have happened outside the, what do I want to call it, the sanctity of your relationship, right? The trust, this bond, union, the things that have been going on without your knowledge, they blow up your entire world.
And I feel like a lot of like questioning, like I feel like that probably was in one of those responses, but them having a lot of questions about either the relationship itself or their partner or themselves. And I'm sure that can be directed inward for the partner on the other side of it as well.
Sure. Lots of shame.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, this a lot of the times they don't want to talk to their friends or family members about this, because they know that either people aren't going to believe them, or people are going to tell them that they're overreacting, or they may be fearful that their family or friends are going to turn away from their partner, right? And a majority of betrayed partners do stay with the addict, right? That's not uncommon, and it's not something that betrayed partners should be shamed for, because recovery is possible. Right. If every party is willing to come to the table and do the work and the recovery work, then absolutely recovery of the relationship. Addicts can become absolutely phenomenal partners. Yeah. It takes a lot of work, right? But if they're willing to come to the table and do that, recovery is possible. So I think a lot of them end up becoming isolated.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So yeah, and so then they're struggling with these symptoms of PTSD, right? And you both know as therapists, when a current trauma occurs, if you have any past trauma, that's going to be triggered as well.
Yes.
You know, it can be a very difficult time in that person's life. And then on top of that, you may have an addict who is still acting out, right? And so when we say acting out, they're still engaging in their sexually compulsive behaviors, and they may be continuing to lie. And so even once they've found out about the behaviors, that's not even the worst part for them. It's the continued lying and the continued gaslighting, you know, that occurs afterwards. So that's one of the reasons.
And like you said, the old trauma gets brought up, but also if they've gotten to a point of working through and doing their own healing and having new healthy coping skills, old trauma is brought up, old unhelpful behaviors and thinking patterns and coping skills are brought up. So now you have, I'm very visual, so I'm imagining this culmination of these two chaoses just intertwining together.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. So this is one of the reasons with the multidimensional partner trauma model, we work in 3 phases. And so that first phase is really where we're doing the crisis work, right? We're doing the safety and the stabilization, because once a partner has had their world taken apart, it's important for us to assess, is there any physical abuse going on, right? What's going on at home? Are the children safe? Is that partner safe? What kind of emotional or verbal abuse is going on, right? There may be gaslighting that's going on, and we need to assess for immediate boundary needs that partner needs in order to feel safe and secure within their own home. And that could even mean a therapeutic separation, right? So a therapeutic separation, you're agreeing not to divorce, but there may need to be a time period, in which the couple is even living separately, right? Or to give that betrayed partner some space so that both of them can do some healing before they reconvene as a couple and do the couple work. Does that make sense?
Like that saying, it's almost impossible to heal in the environment where you got hurt.
Right, absolutely. It can be.
You know, having those things in place. Like, can it be done? Absolutely. But I like that you are sharing this model with us, because that's what I mean by that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important too for us to talk about the different types of emotional abuse that occur within these relationships, because that's really where a lot of the hurt and the pain comes from, because oftentimes, not always, but a lot of the times the addict will use these as tactics in order to try to hide their addiction in some way. And so there can be disparagement, there can be hostility, intimidation, social isolation, ordering, commanding, undermining, indifference, something that we would call apparent kindness, which is where they're being seemingly helpful, but the intent is distracting, displacing, and manipulating. All right. And then you get into the blaming and the gaslighting, and in gaslighting, they deny, they attack, and they reverse the victim and the offender role, right? So now the betrayed partner suddenly becomes the villain, and the addict becomes the victim, right? And so they use this to avoid accountability, and they shift all the blame to the betrayed partner. Is that?
Yeah. And as you can imagine, I know these are very different. I'm sorry. I know these are so very different diagnoses and disorders and situations, but I can't help but to see the correlation with alcohol and drug addiction, just working in that field and working with those families. very similar as far as the gaslighting and the manipulation, right? Because if I can put the attention on you, I don't have to talk about my problems, which again, unhelpful coping mechanisms, cognitive distortions go across all lines and all disorders. It's just so mirroring for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to be able to relate to that, you know, just based on what you're saying, because that's kind of what we have more experience with as therapists and even people in the general public, right? Because sex addiction's pretty quiet. Nobody talks about it. There's a lot of shame. And the fact that they keep it so compartmentalized, you know, they can go on for years and years and years, and the people closest to them won't know anything about it. So, but the gaslighting really is the worst because it leads to severe depression, and it creates a loss of identity in the betrayed partner. They don't even know who they are anymore, right? It creates a lot of confusion.
So I wonder if that's where earlier maybe I jumped the gun in that the area of questioning. You know, like the gaslighting from the partner, I feel like can trigger a lot of that for the betrayed partner.
Well, and the questioning is safety seeking, right? They're constantly wanting to check their phone or check their email, wanting to have the location set on their phone, all of these different things that an addict, or if you have someone who is taking a codependency standpoint, would say, well, you know, you really shouldn't be trying to control what let the addict have his own recovery. No, these are safety seeking behaviors for the betrayed partner.
That feeling of like, if I'm going through this, I want to feel like we're going through it together. I want that feeling of security and knowing that you are holding yourself accountable.
Right. Exactly.
And then attachment, I keep hearing connection. And, you know, going back to if they've had former trauma, their attachment style, if they already had an anxious attachment and now there's an infidelity and now I'm overly anxious and I feel like I need that constant reassurance that we're together on this, like Kelsi said.
Right. And that I'm safe. And so one of the other things we do in the very beginning phase of treatment is getting tested for STIs.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be done. So if there's anybody that's listening to this podcast that you found out that your partner has gone outside the relationship, that's one of the number one things that has to be done. Right. As embarrassing as it can be, I get it. Right. You don't want to go to your doctor and tell them this, but it's imperative. And then we also have to look at, do they have enough financial resources? Will the family face any risks, right, of job loss or status loss, right? If the disclosure gets out, if this addiction gets out, are they going to be shunned from their church, right? What other fallouts are going to occur because of this? Does that make sense?
Are the kids going to get bullied at school, or you know, or I'm just thinking about the impact on the kids. And there's so many things. As you were talking, I mean, there's so many interconnected things. Every time we have a podcast, it's hard for me to stay focused, because you say getting tested for STIs, no matter how, you know, uncomfortable that might be, is one of the first things after we establish physical safety, emotional safety, right? Because Maslow.
Yep.
We need the basic hierarchy, right? If you don't have safety and stability, we can't work on these higher level goals of saving your relationship.
No.
You add in a physical health condition on that your partner essentially, you know, gave you, or, you know, carried over and gave you, that would add a whole other
layer.
Something. Yeah, that's already feels so big.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, super important. And then also in this time frame, we're working on reducing the trauma symptoms. We're learning to manage triggers, how to manage our anxiety, our stress, and to set those appropriate boundaries, right? If you've got a partner who's acting outside your marriage, it may be best for your safety and security to say, to have a period of abstinence, of sexual abstinence within your relationship, right? While you get your STI testing. Appropriate boundaries may be, if we are intimate with each other, that protection is always used, right? So it could even be where we're sleeping, where we're living, how we're interacting with each other. So it's figuring out what it's unique and individual to each partner in what they need in order to feel safe and secure.
Mm-hmm. It's like we say at the beginning, like it's systemic, but like, I don't know the correct term. It's almost like bottom up or top down. I don't know. It's like the opposite kind of way of viewing systemic, issues with addiction. Like you said, with alcoholism or addiction, it's like the whole family unit. But then sex addiction is just as systemic, but it's the timeline is almost flipped.
Right, because the betrayed partner in the beginning, really the only responsibility is your own safety and self-care.
Right.
Right. That's it. And obviously making sure your children are cared for, like if you've got kids,
right.
Or other, responsibilities. But that's the main focus. Your focus is not helping the addict in their recovery. It's taking care of yourself. Because I kind of think about it as like, it's like the balance is off. And the only way to get things back in, right, is to have the partner engaging in self-care things. And so that can be working with a therapist or a coach on a weekly basis. That can be yoga, mindfulness. We also like to get betrayed partners into groups, right? The group modality is incredibly healing for the betrayed partners to be able to walk into a group of other men, other women who have experienced the exact same thing as you.
Yeah.
Right? When you felt so isolated and alone, not able to talk to your family, not able to talk to your friends about it, embarrassed going to your doctor, right? You can finally walk into a room of people that get you.
Feel that connection, like Amanda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you clarify, and it might be both, is that self-help or is that a structured therapy group that you're mentioning?
Structured therapy group.
Okay.
Right.
Are there self-help groups out there for this? I feel like I haven't heard of them.
Well, there are 12-step groups. CODA is one of the 12-step groups.
That's more codependency related, though. That's not specific to intimate partner betrayal.
Right. So somebody who's on a strict budget, or maybe somebody who's able to compartmentalize that, right? To say, okay, I'm going to go because I know I'm going to encounter betrayed partners. This is a free resource. I can go multiple times a week. The problem is they have to use that codependency language when they refer to themselves in the meeting. So if I ever send anybody to one of those meetings, I make sure that I preface that, right? And then I allow them to make their decision as to whether they can compartmentalize that and get out of the meeting what they want to get out of it, or whether that's something that's really a non-negotiable for them.
Yeah.
Oh.
That makes a lot of sense.
So the recommendation is more of like a structured group, therapy group.
Structured therapy group.
Thank you.
Led by either a coach or a therapist. APSATS, the organization the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists, trains therapists, and they also train coaches. And then there are certified sex addiction therapists as well that run groups for partners. So, yeah, there's lots of them out there.
Like
that's an important part of treatment.
Absolutely. Can you, Rebecca, touch on, like we've talked about, like the couples, like healing through individual therapy, and then doing like the couples therapy work, the structured group aspect. And then I think like before today, you had mentioned like therapeutic disclosure and impact a restitution letter.
Yeah. So what we don't want is a staggered disclosure. So staggered disclosure is D-Day, right? Plus well, I'll tell you a little bit of this, and then you're going to find out something else. So it's staggered. It's dribbled out, right? Everything that's happened is dribbled out slowly over time. Every single time new information is dribbled out, that partner re-experiences the entire trauma over again.
Same thing with your hand as I started doing
Yep.
this thing. Oh.
It's like,
Is it not? And so when you're saying dribbled, it feels like it's not dribbled out until there's something else found, and then it's like, oh, by the way, oh yeah, oh, I mean, I
by
did
the way,
do that.
yeah, when I was in California for work, yeah, I did.
That's not something that they're offering, volunteering. It's not till they're caught again. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that creates a lot of trauma. Research shows, I think the statistic is like 92% of couples are happy with their therapeutic disclosure, right? They are happy that they went through the process. Now, the addict is probably not going to be happy about it in the beginning, right? Because they're going to be working with their CSAT, and they're going to be working through all of their secrets, the people that they hurt, and they are going to create a formal disclosure, right? That they are going to present in a planned therapeutic setting to their partner, right? And so the therapists are present. You can either have a couples therapist that does this, facilitates this for both, or ideally, I would think the addict has his therapist there, the partner has her coach or therapist there supporting her or him through the entire thing. At that point, they read off, right? So everything that's been done, but there are certain details that aren't shared because they can be too traumatic, right? What else do I want to say about that? So once that's done, right, the partner in a separate session is encouraged to write and then to read to the addict the impact letter. What has all of these things that have happened, what impact has that had on the partner? And then
I'm sorry, I think I missed it, or the disclosure, how does that happen? Is that's in a session? Is that something that's literally written? What is that typically, what's best practice for that?
Yeah, okay, so best practice for that is that the addict creates that over several sessions with his or her therapist, right? Typically, the betrayed partner's therapist or coach might get a copy of it maybe the day before so that they can read through it and kind of get an idea of what their client is going to be experiencing the next day. You don't want to hang on to it for weeks, right? Because then you're in a situation where you're holding secrets from the partner. Does that make sense?
Right.
And so then there's a planned time and location. It can be at the therapy office of either therapist, right? And typically what we recommend is that each partner come separately and have a friend drive them there and stay there while they do it, right? So that they have a support person. You're not bringing these people in to do a disclosure and then being like, have a good night, see you next week, right? They need to
go drive home in the same car together.
No. They need to plan to spend the night apart, engaging in self-care with their support system.
So the addict would read that to the partner?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like more factual information sharing at that point. And then,
exactly. And the partner
it almost reminds me of like, just as a parallel, it almost reminds me of like sharing your step work with, I know it's different, but sharing your step work with your sponsor. Like you do it and then you read it to them, right? For like that clarification.
Like
okay. And then the partner has their impact statement they write.
They do. And they're also allowed to ask clarifying questions.
Okay.
Right? So for example, I don't even know what example to get, but let's say that they list something off that maybe they kind of knew about. They had more information than what was shared in here, or maybe they have a question if it was a specific person that they knew.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they can ask clarifying questions. It's just, we try to keep these disclosures incredibly structured, because you can imagine the emotions that are happening within this room. So you want to keep it very structured.
Yeah, but not very therapeutic, very quick.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why there are breaks in which the partner is able to communicate with their therapist. Hey, I want clarification on this, this, and this, and I need to ask a question around this, and I want them to go back and repeat this because I'm not sure I heard that correctly.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
And then the impact that comes later. So they go back, they leave separately, that kind of thing. And then the betrayed partner writes their own kind of impact statement. And then they reconvene like in a similar fashion for that to be shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then from there, right, by this point, the idea is that the addict is in a state of sobriety, right? So they're not acting out anymore. They're working with their CSAT. They're going to their 12-step meetings. They're going to their group therapy. The partner is in his or her group, working with the therapist or coach, doing the work, and then they might work with a couples therapist.
Okay.
Right? They might be in couples therapy this whole time, but it's not traditional couples therapy like we think of it as �々𝘵𝘬𝘐, emotionally focused therapy stuff. You're not doing that. You're doing basic communication, co-parenting, trying to reduce triggers.
Mm-hmm. Navigating those boundaries that were put
right
in for healing.
Yeah, navigating boundaries. Right. Once you've done the therapeutic disclosure, as long as everybody's in sobriety, you're getting a step closer to doing the actual couples work, right? Which is where we kind of get into the phase 2. Right. Once everybody's stabilized, we've entered a phase of sobriety, everybody's gone into recovery. Well, then the partner can engage in treatment modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, flash technique, mindfulness, meditation, somatic experiencing, yoga, martial arts can be helpful. And then they can get into the relational trauma repair, right? Because if you think about, imagine what sex addiction is going to do to not only the addict, the partner, and the couple. It's a sexual trauma, right? And so we have to acknowledge that as part of the treatment. And sexual trauma impacts how we feel about our bodies. It negatively impacts our desire, our arousal, our willingness to engage in sexual intimacy. It changes how we express ourselves sexually. And it negatively impacts how we experience physical and sexual intimacy. Right. So,
and I would also assume that it impacts your self-esteem and self-worth. Like, was I not good enough? What is wrong with me? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the sexual healing may involve a period of abstinence, between the couple. That's very common in this. Reclaiming sexuality, sexual assertiveness, and then the couples therapy also needs to include some trauma-targeted, like sex therapy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Eventually, just down the road. If people are listening, they just found out, they're thinking, what? Like, remember, phases.
Healing takes time. Yes. So what does that look like? What is that couples therapy, or what do you try to get out of that, or how do you facilitate? Because I don't do sex therapy, so I have no idea what that looks like. What might that look like for the couple?
Well, they're going to want to create their own sexual health plan together. right? So they're going to want to create a plan for their relationship. What are the things that both partners are comfortable with, but yet at the same time aren't going to spiral the addict back into their addiction cycle, right? So there may be some things that you have to take off the table because the addict in his or her recovery realizes this is a trigger for me. Does that make sense?
And that's a lot. I can imagine what kind of a learning process that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I know it's different and I have to get that out of my head maybe. But it's like, they're not going to stop having sex forever.
No.
Whereas an alcoholic is going to stop drinking forever, or an addict will stop using drugs, right? So I find it so interesting. It's like, well, now we need to safely have sex without triggering.
It's like harm reduction if my brain's comparing it to something.
Yeah. It's like how it almost then trauma healing, like how are we rewiring our brain that this is, I'm doing this behavior and I'm engaging this, but it's safe and it's healthy.
Right.
Like this. Yeah. I'm just going to stop talking because I have so many thoughts. So wait, I have one question. When we were talking about D-Day, Kelsi kind of mentioned things about like sobriety dates, and you said, once they're in sobriety, is that date for the addict considered the day they do the disclosure or the day they stop the behavior? Or is that a thing even to have a date? Or
is there a sobriety date with sex addiction?
Yeah, there is. There is. Yeah. So the day, it's not uncommon for addicts to maybe do 90 meetings in 90 days. Once they create, so we do, we could create a whole series on this. So now we're getting into, but basically they do a lot of work to figure out what are the things that I am absolutely not supposed to do at all. Right? And then what are the things that I need to have some boundaries with? I need to be careful. And then what are the healthy things that I'm doing? Well, the couple is basically going to do the same thing with their own relationship and rebuilding healthy sexual intimacy between the two of them.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
That makes sense.
And so additional goals for couples therapy, are going to be developing a secure attachment. Because you talked about it earlier in the podcast. What happens to the attachment after this, right? Becomes fearful, avoidant, preoccupied, right? Developing strategies to manage triggers, because those aren't going to go away. Promoting a balance of power in the relationship. You can imagine how unbalanced the relationship is if you've got one person that's keeping an entire part of their life secret. And then the facilitation of the emotional restitution, which we talked about with the impact and the restitution letters. And then really grounding that couple in recovery. So that could mean that they're in addition to their couples therapy, they're going to a Recovering Couples Anonymous, an RCA group, right, with other couples who are also in recovery. That can be a great experience for them. So
there's so many options for healing.
I don't know if this is only a Texas thing or if I'm just unaware, but I had no idea that was a thing. I've never heard of RCA. And I've heard of a lot of 12-step groups. I've never heard of that. That's national? That's worldwide? That's a common?
It is.
Or is that a newer one? Okay.
I'm not sure how long it's been around, but it's definitely not as popular as like AA or Al-Anon. But there are groups. Even as large as Houston is, I think there's only one RCA group in Houston.
Wow. Okay.
So that doesn't surprise me that you haven't heard of it.
Okay.
That makes me feel a little better. I did see the resource.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
And then also,
sorry,
go ahead.
Real quick. And this can literally be like a quick answer. Do you work on both? I don't even know if this is a correct way of asking it, but do you work on both sides? Do you primarily work with the addict themselves? Not so much with partners, or both?
All of the above.
Okay.
But I wouldn't do everything with one couple.
Correct.
Right? So
Right.
I have addicts, I have partners,
Okay.
And I have couples.
I was curious.
None of them are related to each other.
Okay, that's all. I was just so curious, and I didn't ask that at the beginning, so sorry.
Well, you know, with MFT world, it's like you've got the no secrets policy. You can't be working with an addict at the same time, doing that type of work and work with the couple.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there are people that do it. I am not one of them.
Yeah, I was curious, like if you did both, not with the same, you know, partners, but like if you were on one side or the other, like primarily in your work. So, but thank you.
It's about equal.
Okay. Thank you.
Which gives me an interesting perspective, I think.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And then additionally, one of the things we didn't talk about how important grief work is, right? Because there's, like you said, hindsight is 20/20. When you go back and you look at all the memories that are now different for you.
That questioning that came to my head.
Yeah, but the loss of time, the loss of the marriage that you thought you had, or the commitment that you thought you had. So that's an important part of the work as well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I am regularly reminding and educating people that grief is not just death.
No.
Grief is feeling the loss for something you had or thought you had, right? So grief could be having a physical condition now take away the life that you thought you were going to have in the future, right? So I'm really glad that you brought that up. In addition to trauma, there's also grief of what were happy memories actually were false.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So once we get to phase 3, remember, timeline, this doesn't happen in 30 days. This is long term. But phase 3, you're looking at reconnecting with your world, rebuilding trust within your intimate relationship, but also your trust with the world, right? Because once this happens, it's hard to trust anybody.
Yes.
Right? Even like your friends, you might think that they're lying to you. If you've been experiencing gaslighting and living with an addict for 20 years, 15 years, 5 years,
your brain is like, oh, this person would do that to me. Then like, who else would?
Everybody. Who else would? Everybody wants to hurt me, right? So it's rebuilding that trust. It's creating a vision for your future. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be with your betraying partner, right? You don't have to. A lot of people do stay. There's no shame in staying, but there's also no shame in deciding this isn't for me. And I'm ready to move out on my own and live my own life. All right. Maybe moving into some family of origin work, if that's needed as part of recovery. And then rebuilding the relationship, intimacy within the relationship, and moving on, and then potentially helping others, if that's how you want to give back.
Do you ever find that the people that move on, what am I trying to ask? Do you find yourself, them coming to you for help trusting a new person?
Absolutely.
Okay. I was guessing, but okay.
Yeah. It's looking for the red flags. Are they seeing, because now they can look back at their relationship and see the signs of gaslighting, see the signs that they're being lied to and blamed, or there are secret things happening that they don't know about. And so, yeah, it's difficult to trust if they embark on dating or new relationships. Yeah.
That's oh my gosh, there's so much.
It's such a full
as a
thing.
People think that when you're a therapist, you just know everything. And this whole episode is, I mean, I know trauma, I know something about addiction, but apparently I don't know all addiction, because I know nothing about sex addiction. And, it's just so much to learn. And so I so appreciate you coming on. I know there were some resources you wanted to make sure you shared, to kind of help some couples. So if you want to share them out loud, or if you want to send them to me and I can put them in the show notes, or both, we can do that.
Yeah,
I kind of took some notes.
Yeah, why don't I send you maybe some books that would be helpful, that probably rattling them off here isn't going to be helpful, but if that's something that you can add.
Yeah. I already kind of took note of like the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts, Trauma Specialists, Certified Sex Addictions Therapists, just so people can, if they're looking for someone, knowing what type of certification, and then the Recovery Couples Anonymous as a support. But yeah, if you want to send me any other resources, we'll put them in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, I will for sure, because I think that would be helpful for people.
Okay. We always ask our guests if there are any, I know you've shared so much already, but just kind of in closing, if we kind of take a breath and just, is there anything, any mantra, any last minute, like something, one statement that you want to leave our listeners with or our audience with as we kind of close out this podcast?
It won't feel this way forever.
Like, just let that one sink in. Like,
I was gonna say I need to sit with that one for a minute, and you kind of got me tearing up.
Yeah.
That's so applicable to everything.
Yep.
Won't feel this way for everything. Thank you. Or forever, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, Rebecca, you are welcome back anytime.
Oh, this was fun.
thank you so much.
I mean, it's a deep topic, it's a dark topic, but I'm glad we're talking about it, because the more we talk about it, the more people are going to see, oh my God, there are other people that are experiencing this. Absolutely. There's thousands of them out there.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Sure. Well, thank you again. We appreciate your time. To everyone, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest episodes. Please comment below reactions, questions. I got Rebecca's contact information, so if there's a question I can't answer but you want to know, I'll make sure I ask her and get the info. What kind of resources you need, what topics you want us to talk about, that kind of thing. Next week, we are talking to Steph Schaefer. She is going to be talking about the beauty of books and how they really encourage our wellness and health, and how, what kind of books can be helpful for that. So stay tuned for that episode. Thank you very much, guys. Take care and have a
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.